Hey everybody, welcome back to the program. Today I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on the new film, Beatles 64. This is the new documentary that came out on Disney+. And overall, I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. I felt like this fell into the trap of trying to tell the whole story of the Beatles' rise of fame. And so like a quarter of the way through or so, we cut away from America and then we go to Liverpool. We talk about where they come from. We talk about the rise of rock and roll. And then there's Little Richard and there's Bash Sheet of Pat Boone. It was just like, wait, where are we going with all this? And I think ultimately I was expecting this to come from the viewpoint of the Beatles arriving in America and what they thought of it. You know, I thought it was going to be more about their rise of fame in the US and how that affected them. Instead, we learn about how their music affected so many people at that time, but this feels like a moot point. I mean, you know, this was made for Beatles fans. We already know the power of their music. And maybe it was the fact that we really didn't learn anything new since pretty much all of the vintage footage of the Beatles was already released. And that being said, the vintage footage looks fantastic. It sounds great, especially compared to what we had before. And I love the inclusion, the new footage of the fans and non-fans talking about the Beatles. It's hilarious at times, and it really added to the story. Where I think it went amiss is the new interview footage. It felt tacked on, and it didn't add a lot, and it often pulled me out of the vintage footage. It didn't feel like it had a lot of direction either. For instance, it was really cool seeing Ringo and Martin Scorsese hang out and looking at clothes, but it wasn't as impactful as I felt it should have been. I mean, I don't know what could have made it better. Maybe having more cameras or maybe having it be more focused. Also, Jack Douglas talking about visiting Liverpool and then hanging out with John Lennon was a great story, but I don't see how it related to the film. It felt like that should have been its own documentary. The editing and pacing felt off to me. It honestly felt like a rough cut. You know, things are presented, but they're not really connected. Like when we finally get to the Washington concert, we cut back to Ringo talking, but the music cuts off. You know, and I wish he was talking more over the footage, especially when we see what he's talking about right after he says it. The live performances were fantastic and they sounded great too. I just wanted more of them in general. In fact, I wanted more music overall for a movie about the Beatles. It was way too quiet. And it's also strange how we get a really long clip of Smokey Robinson before we get any full clips of vintage Beatles concert footage. And I love Smokey Robinson, but you know, this is a Beatles documentary. It seemed really weird. You know, it felt like they wanted to tell too big of a story for an hour and a half. Also, the things it wanted to say with archival footage, I think was better covered by the anthology series. I think it should have stayed more focused on the few months of their first trip. The original documentary by the Maisel brothers and the updated version from the 90s felt more immersive. It feels like we're hanging out with the group. And I don't feel like this film added much beyond the performances, those live concert performances. I would have rather have seen a re-edit of the original documentary with more of the performances included, basically stay in the black and white footage the whole time instead of cutting back to modern interview clips or any of the talk show clips from the 70s and 80s. Or, you know, if not that, just put it together in a more traditional way. I mean, 8 Days a Week was a way better documentary, and so was Summer of Soul. In fact, Summer of Soul had a way better edit of people talking about the event. It really added to the film. It didn't take me out whatsoever. And, you know, for me, there was no real through line or story here. It just felt kind of aimless. And, you know, there was no real strong context for where the Beatles were and why they played where they played. Like when they went to Miami for the Ed Sullivan Show, like why were they there? Why did they shoot the show there? Ultimately, I think we got the macro idea of their impact, but we know that story. We know Beatlemania, and it didn't even tell that story very well. I wanted to see a micro version of the Beatles experience being in America for the first time as a group. You know, the Beatles are larger than life, and so I wanted a smaller film. The original documentaries are very intimate, and I think there's something special there. And if you haven't seen them, you gotta check them out. I watched them over on archive.org, and you know, admittedly the quality of the video isn't great, but you know, I think the footage speaks for itself. All right, everybody, that'll do it for today. I'm curious to know what you think. Did you like it? Did you love it? Were you kind of like I was? Leave a comment down below. Until then, thank you all so much for watching, but I especially want to thank my members over on Patreon. I'm your Vinyl Geek, and I'll catch you on the flip side.